All right, here with Dr. James Spencer again. We will be discussing here a discussion board question, and I'll read it to you here briefly, and then we'll cover 4 questions related to this topic. So, in his Introducing the Prophetic Books, Wilhelm Wagenaar has suggested that the Old Testament prophets spoke out against the realpolitik, which is power politics, and the vox populi, which is voice of the people. Such speaking out was an act in which the prophets often set themselves up as social outcasts. They were called to set aside their own reputation and standing to speak against those societal influences and influencers who were using their power in abusive and sinful ways. So, James, can you get into a little bit of this first question? In what ways have you seen Isaiah participate in such behavior?
Yeah, I think just first, by the way of introduction, I think I'd say that there is a common misconception that prophets were on the side of the people,
Yeah.
and that's not the case. So when we're talking about this distinction between the realpolitik or the power politics of today and the vox populi, the prophets weren't on either team.
Yeah.
They were on God's team.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important thing to state at the beginning. The way that it manifests itself in Isaiah most of the time is against the kings.
Yeah.
So particularly in the case of Ahaz, you see Ahaz making moves that are more in line with the political climate of the day. He's trying to make alliances with Egypt to go against Assyria. He's trying to form these different alliances so that he can protect his kingdom and his reign.
Yeah.
And Isaiah comes to him and says, "Listen, you haven't really considered aligning yourself with God here."
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you get into that whole the giving of the sign of Emmanuel,
Right.
And really the condemnation of Ahaz's strategy in doing this.
Mm-hmm.
There are other places, though, in Isaiah where Isaiah is really railing against the people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get it both ways in Isaiah, but the primary one I would say is the most prominent one, at least, is against the royal party.
Sure. Now, what social system primarily is Isaiah speaking against then? Is that what you're kind of talking about, both the kings and the people? But if you're going to address a particular social system, how would you do that?
Yeah, the social system is really the context in which the people and the king live. Now, the king has a lot more to do with setting that up usually than the people.
Sure.
And in this case, for the bad Israelite kings, the social system you usually see set up is one in which the king is being fairly oppressive, taxing the people, acquiring wealth, setting up an army, all of those kind of things that make them look very much like the typical ancient Near Eastern nation.
Mm-hmm.
Think back to Samuel, when the people come to Samuel and they first ask him, "Hey, can we have a king like all the other nations?" He says, "Okay, God has told me that, yeah, he's going to give this to you, but just know that this king is going to acquire horses and chariots, that this king is going to tax you, he's going to take your best people to be in his army."
Right.
And the problem with that is, the problem with this sort of social system that very much depends on strong militaries, the high economic yields, and those kind of things, is that it excludes God.
Yeah.
At some point, what do you need it for?
Right.
And so a lot of times the prophets are coming back to this system and saying, kings, listen, you really don't need these huge armies. God can defeat the Assyrians with just 300.
Yep.
And God can do things with little stuff. As far as the people are concerned, that sort of attitude and that experience with the kings, where they're trying to acquire wealth and all that kind of thing, it trickles down to the people.
Sure.
This is where you get into questions of like unjust scales in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Of people still working on the Sabbath or forcing others to work on the Sabbath.
Good.
If you're falling in line with the social system in which God is a part, you don't actually need to work on the Sabbath because God's going to provide.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to cheat your fellow Israelites because God's going to provide.
Yeah.
So these become signs of a social system that is really more dependent on material, more dependent on competition and on greed and gain.
Yep.
Than you really need if God's going to be involved.
Yeah. Very good. Now, do you see the church having adopted a social system in our present day or throughout history that runs on this power politics idea, or capitulates in some way to the desires of the people that it seeks to serve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to be realistic. I think everybody would like to see a church, a modern-day church, that doesn't have any politics.
Of course.
We'd love to see that, where everybody's just in harmony and getting along, and nobody's feeling get hurt, nobody's trying to get anything done, and everybody's just in full agreement on the strategies that we should practice. But that's not reality.
Mm-hmm.
Reality is that simple people construct places that are imperfect.
Yep.
And there is a concept called structural evil. You see it occasionally in theology, where basically any social structure of which you're a part has holes.
Mm-hmm.
It has holes either of omission. We weren't thinking about caring about this group, but we really need to do that now. Or just basically things where you're making decisions to exclude people.
Sure.
And so I think all that to say, yeah, the church does follow its own sort of power politics.
Mm-hmm.
It does have its people have its own voice.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't know that I would give any specific examples. This is always a dynamic that can occur. There's a reason why these things are recorded in the Old Testament, and therefore our instructions so we can avoid doing these things, or at least we don't avoid them, catch ourselves and repent, turn another way. And so I think I can see that definitely happening within churches, particularly ones with strong identities that have a tendency to exclude people that don't conform to those identities.
Very good. Yeah. Now, sorry, you have something else to say?
No,
okay. Go ahead. Well, I was just going to, in conclusion here, address the last question, which, in particular to what Isaiah is saying in his words. Does the church of our day, obviously, we need to hear the words of Isaiah, but how would you, in terms of taking Isaiah's words, understanding its context, and now receiving it today in our context, how would you form that transition or make that interpretation and that application for us?
I think that I've participated in church. One of the big things that I've seen as problematic is an emphasis on effectiveness. We tend to want to get things done. We tend to want to make things bigger. Let's have more converts, more baptisms, more this, more that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start new ministries. Let's build big ministries.
Mm-hmm.
Let's build new churches.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with wanting more, right? And so I don't want to say that those tendencies are bad. But the one thing that I think we can take from Isaiah is that if those things become the end, they become a problem. If we're trying to get more people because more people makes our ministries bigger, it makes us more visible, and those sort of things, that becomes a sort of system that can exclude God.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that we can really take from Isaiah is, as we're doing our ministries, we take time periodically to ask ourselves, okay, we're being successful, but at what point are we really leaving God out?
Yeah.
How are we intentionally including God, but at what points are we really leaving God out?
Yeah.
I think that's a question that can help churches to safeguard falling into the kind of orientation and tendencies that the ancient Israelites fell into, where they become really dependent on something other than what God can do for them. It may not change the way the church looks a ton, may not change the goals of the church, but I think would certainly change the internal motivations. I think would certainly change the way decisions are made, and it would definitely give us a nice check, just to make sure that we're doing and moving in the right direction.
Now, often when you address something like this, where we're potentially leaving God out, and a lot of what you were covering there with how churches oftentimes deal with this is that they essentially take what they're doing and they try to do as good a job they can do, be as effective as they can do, with essentially they're without God with their human capabilities. And when a church is doing things within their, with what they can do with their humanity, essentially you've taken out the divine influence and power. I mean, when you mentioned the Israelites and how God wanted to have them beat other armies or win victories with a fraction of the men, essentially what's impossible to do with just human effort. He's wanting to bring a supernatural dynamic to empower them. How far are we to actually take this in what this might look like today? Is it supposed to be something that we're just supposed to say, hey, we just need to reflect on this, and yeah, we should have a little bit more of God, and how far are we to take this today?
I think I'll speak to it like this. I think the biggest mistake the church can make is saying, here's all the good stuff that we're doing, and stopping there.
Mm-hmm.
I think the good stuff is never good enough.
Mm-hmm.
You hear kind of the phrase, good is the enemy of great.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, to some extent, good is the enemy of God. and God is a holy God. That's a big emphasis in Isaiah, is that God is this transcendent being that has no other like him, and that's the standard we really are shooting for, is to be holy and other,
mm-hmm.
to really participate in God's life, and allow him to participate in ours. And so I think that churches really need to be thinking through not what's best practice, but is this, how are the other bigger ministries doing it, all those kind of things. And there needs to be a real reconnection with God and ensuring that God is empowering our ministries, doing things that are, in essence, stupid. and because God is calling us to. I remember, I'll just give one example. The pastor that we're going to now, I think is very good at this. We were running a camp, and there was a scholarship fund, and there were 10 other kids that needed to go, couldn't afford it, and the scholarship fund was out of money.
Uh-huh.
No more money. This is a relatively small church. We have 500 members, including children. So, it's not a big place. You just let the other kids go. No money behind it, no donations behind it, no nothing. Just let the other kids go, because he knew that this was going to be a powerful trip. People are going to be saved on the trip. People are going to recommit to Christ on the trip. It's back. The money's there. It's always been there. And I think while that can always turn out another way, you know what I'm saying? Like it always can. I think those are the kind of stupid choices that churches need to be making. It's not about what we have in the bank. It's not about the resources we have amongst our community. Not about our talent. Not about anything like that. We definitely need to attend to it. But at some point, you just make the stupid
choice. That's hilarious, and I think something that can be, a catchphrase in our minds. I think another way we can look at that is risk. I've heard it said that faith in the life of a Christian is spelled R-I-S-K, and the Christian life was meant to be ones where you take risk, where the Holy Spirit has to show up for your vision to be essentially attained, and essentially that can look like stupid choices, and I think that's a great example of what you just gave. So anyway, we're out of time for this discussion. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, Dr. Spencer.